Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the meta report for the progress season. Apologies for it being very late. Me and Westy have been busy boys, which is why I'm in fact on my own this week, as Westy has gone to Toulouse. So I've been left to do this, which is also why the quality is much worse than normal, because I don't know how to edit very well. So I hope you enjoy this very fun spreadsheet or presentation that I made for everyone. I put both week 1 and 2 together because it made a bit more sense to me to do that, especially after the fact that we've only got 2 weeks of the progress season, and there's been a big change in Silver Age. It is just Silver Age that we're doing these first 2 weeks, and then we'll have CC. And also just as it currently stands, it's a bit of a lost meta, in the sense that because of the BnR that happened, we kind of aren't. It's the data isn't particularly relevant, except just to kind of get an idea of what it was like and maybe what we can see going forward. So for now, it's kind of do as we normally do. But to start, look at the first week and second week's kind of standings, as you would probably imagine. Briar kind of dominating with KO the second, and kind of everything in a smattering there. You kind of saw from the first week of Silver Age that we had in the London calling. Briar did very well, obviously. PVG, shout out to Paul winning that one, but also we kind of see KO coming up after the fact, even though it didn't necessarily do particularly well. It was there, it was it topped in the showdown and in the calling, but it wasn't necessarily perceived to be one of the best decks. But I think the data as we go on will kind of show that is definitely the case, with Dorinthia and Kano being the decks that kind of overtook it in that alleged assumed kind of start of kind of meta dominance, but still kind of they're still there, but popularity is not nearly as much as the KO or the Briar, which we can see here, and we can also see it here in the week 2 with Briar and KO still being that above 20 wins each. Briar above and beyond in the 50s in both senses, while Dory falling to third. We're still in the other teens, but KO falling down Kano rather falling down, as I think people realised. It's not as easy to play into these KOs and Briars. I think KO especially is not a great matchup for Kano in comparison. But of course we had a change. The ban and restriction announcement has banned a lot of things. Most importantly, I think Braces, Lightning Press, and Burn Up Shock being the big hits to Briar, which I think would make them be a big downswing in terms of popularity going into the next iteration of Silver Age, which for most of us will be the battlegrounds that we get, and also any showdowns that you play, like for example Toulouse. Other hits, Steelblade Shunt and Aether Spindle hits to the Great Axe decks and to Kano specifically. From my personal opinion, I don't think Spindle is too bad of a hit. It's actually one that I'm quite surprised about, because it feels like a bit too light if you were worried about Wizards in general, especially with Blaze coming about as well. But I do understand the need to ban in an opt, a big opter, I suppose, if you're worried about Blaze in that regard. It's a light tap in my opinion, but one that I'm happy to see, although maybe a bit biased. And then Steelblade Shunt, a decent hit for Great Axe, I think, in particular if you were being a Guardian player. I think Shunt is particularly potent into you there, and kind of means that you start the game on potentially even -6 health. It makes things such as going weapon for weapon into them much harder. You have to do things like play millers, so the value's lower, whereas I think a lot of people would prefer to do things like play sledge. So I think this helps a lot there. And also Sirens of Safe Harbor, I think, was a good ban for the format. It was particularly good in decks like KO and Ira, which it's just additional value. Even stuff like Oldham and the other slop decks, I say sloppers, decks that were blocking a lot. It was just good to have that in the blues, just as it was a way that you could block smaller damage, Kodachis from Ira and stuff, and still get free value out of the card, which is nice. So I think a good ban as far as generics go, but not necessarily a hit that I would expect if you were also aiming at KO, which I think they maybe should have done. So Sirens being the only hit for them in that sense, it hasn't really necessarily weakened their aggressive proactive power. It's just kind of like taken out a glue card in their deck, which, I mean, it was a card that was quite quite annoying for Kano. I know I'm going back to Kano again. I can't stop talking about Wizards. What a surprise! But it's still not necessarily something that takes away their potency. And of course we have the unbans, which are particularly interesting. I think a lot of people are very happy to see Rake the Embers back, a lot of Dromai fans there, and then root-bound characters was not something that I expected them to bring back, but I think is definitely fine. You know, Florian and Verdance aren't necessarily very popular already, and I think Florian has like a particular niche that could be useful in a world where things like Kano and like Enigma are gone in the future, and we need like a deck that can kind of combat these slower fatigue style decks from kind of just being running rampant. You need that kind of deck to keep you on your toes. And Amulet Ice is also very interesting, as it kind of gives you another angle for Icelander and an Oldham as well. I think I'll talk a bit more about these kind of things later on, and kind of what we should expect the meta to be going into the future. But I think are all fine bans. I don't think, or unbans rather, and I don't think that any of them will see any particular problematic issues with the format, compared to the cards that were banned. So if we go into the meta report now, we've got the first week. I'm gonna go through these quite quickly because there's no, I'm not gonna talk too much about them. A lot of the events are quite small, so I think it's just good to get a general idea of mainly the top eights. Particularly for these small events, like for example Worcester here we only had 11 players, but I think you'll generally see across all of these the main decks, you'll see a lot of KO, you'll see a lot of Briar, Ira, a smattering of Guardians of their various degrees to Infia. I think you'll see those generally. In this case, I believe it was only the one wizard, Mike Williams there. Congratulations on winning, taking down a Briar, which is not common. I realise I've accidentally added an extra Ira there in the corner. That is not relevant, don't worry about that. It was only a top 4, as obviously we have 11 players. But a smattering of decks there, basically the big 4, I would say, in terms of like classes in the format. And then I guess an Illusionist being kind of maybe 5th. Or I suppose Ninja, which is kind of ironic with Ira being there, hiding in the shadows. We have Langden Games 19, much better. We're getting some smatterings of more interesting decks, so like Dromai, Azalea, Viserai, Riptide. Riptide's an interesting one. It kind of fits a specific niche of being like particularly good into like Fi and Ira with the traps, but does kind of fall over to anyone that does want to just not interact with them in the way they want to. So like Sledge and Guardian, Decimator if they just swing Decimator. Illusionists are very annoying. They can potentially, Riptide can potentially deal with them in the same way that Dorinthia and the Axe deck did, with like Steelblade Shunt being quite annoying into the Ward Auras because it does proc them. But I think in a general sense that is just kind of like their game to lose rather than the Riptide having a lot of priority in that regard. Aurora there too. Aurora's interesting. Obviously they banned the bans also hit her because Lightning Press and Lightning Press actually and Braces I suppose were quite useful for her. Bird Up Shock also in Aurora sense, and I guess in a different sense Lexi also lost Lightning Press, which was quite important for her to get over like the blocky decks, which I think might make it quite hard for her to be relevant. We see here Briar taking it down. Very prevalent KO and Briar top 4, for 2 of each, with like the other smattering of decks kind of being taken out in that later. So congrats to Jack Bradbury for winning that one. Highlander Games, we were only 11 players, but a lot of Kanos, and as you probably imagine from this kind of scenario, we had 3 Kanos in the top 4, but the Terror managing to come out of it on top, which Terror is probably one of the more interesting decks in terms of like fatiguing wizard. The Oldham has the possibility of it, but like Terror has the interesting advantage of being able to like comfortably hold up resources, and then if they don't do anything in response, you get to make a might, so you get to turn that into proactive power. But if not, you just get to block with it. So it's kind of a catch-22 for the Kano, and swinging like Sledge for 7 is very frustrating eventually. So it kind of puts you on an amount of a clock, which is more than, like I say, for a lot of other slower decks that are trying to like fatigue you. We got Dark Sphere here in London. This is the first of they get 2. Good for them. 25 players, that's a very nice amount. Now it's like to see the bigger numbers with the bigger events. I think the smaller ones is more likely, especially because it's like Sage, and I think a lot of people are like taking some time to warm up to the format, which I think is fine. I personally think it's a great format, but like I'm not one to put my feelings on it to other people. Seeing here, like there's more Iras here than you'd normally see. Ira being like quite a easy pick to choose. Very consistent, very good damage. But the the story of this one, I think, is the most important. In if none of you know Jacob Clements, hard to not know him really nowadays. Top of the World Tour leaderboard currently, UK #1, general world #1, I guess, as you would think. Decides to play Levire, kind of as a joke, I think, mainly, but comes out of it victorious. Now he can't play Levire in CC though, so unlucky for him. But congrats to Jacob there. But I think outside of that, it's interesting because we got Alexi also met in the finals. Kind of a smattering of decks in this as well. I think we only have 1 duplicate. Oh, no, we have two Iras as well. So 2 duplicates. So like 6 unique heroes is very cool, especially for like a 25-person event. It's nothing to sniff at. So I think that kind of plays to the, even though some might say that the format was kind of like in a bad state in regards to like the oppressiveness of Briar, I do think that realistically there is a lot of avenue for new heroes to come and flex their muscles, especially now that we've gotten the bans and restricted. We got Cardiff here, 13 players, nothing too special, interesting decks. You got Lyeth and Benji. Lyeth's a deck, play these too, actually, noticing that. Guardians in general, I think, are all more or less the same. Valda's got an interesting niche in being particularly good into stuff like KO because of the draw discards being consistent and that being like a positive for her. And then Dominate being quite annoying, especially with the on-hits being like relevant enough on all fronts for KO, like Choke Slams and Cartilage Crush, etc. Or the bigger ones if you'd like. All having like relevant text into what KO would like to do. Lyeth can go either way. I think there's a possibility of that being a fatigue deck. It's possible that it's more than likely the other Guardians are better at that than you, but you also have like an interesting aggro slant, which is kind of plays more like a ranger in that way, whilst having a bit more block value, even though you are basically a ranger, but with Guardian cards. But your on hits are very good, which is something that like Azalea lacks in this format. Going into this, you see it is nothing special here. Free Briar with Kano. This sounds about what you'd expect. Congrats to our current Nats champion, Aaron Boyan. I imagine he would also be looking to reclaim his crown in that season, as we've seen. 24 players at Loughborough. This is about what I would expect. Maybe more Kanos than I'd expect, and KOs I would probably expect them to be swapped around, but this sounds about right. 9 Briars, such a large amount. I think this is the most that we get in the whole 2 weeks in the UK. But with 24 players, that being, I believe, like just over a third of the players, it's quite very crazy. And that's reflected in the top 8 with 4 of them coming through. A couple of Kanos as well. Shout out to Noah Hicks, very good Kano player. And then of course we got Matt Folks, hard not to know who he is nowadays. And then Big Dog Duggan with Matt coming out on top. So congrats to Matt on that. I'm sure he'll be very excited to be going to Vegas. We got Bad Moon Cafe, another London one. 17 players this time. I don't really know what else to say about the format, really. It's more of the same. Ira, a lot of Ira in London, it looks like. 4 here, 4 in Darksphere. So I guess there's a lot more of a kind of ninja contingent, but Ira particularly. And we see here all 4 of the Iras top 8ing, which I think is kind of crazy, with one of them taking it down in the end. All in the bottom, basically the bottom half of the top 8 too, outside of Matea. or Matai, I believe that's probably the best way to explain it, with the KOs on top and the Iras on the bottom there of the top four. Ira taking it down into KO. I think Ira is one that is interesting going into the next format because they have access to a lot of like good value to circumvent KO's value, so like actual on hits that are quite rare in Silver Age. Maybe something I'll speak about a bit later. Sigillite Games, again much of the same, a Benji, which is interesting, a Dash, probably the first Dash we've seen. Wondering how that'll do. I actually think they top forward, which is great. Unfortunately losing to the big bad, but still a great showing for Dash. Dash is an interesting one, susceptible to fatigue, but also like quite powerful in the damage that they can pump out per turn. Then with the Briar winning, I think Briar winning out a lot of these events, as we'll see. Portsmouth was only 9 players, so I believe they only played 3 rounds of Swiss, with the winner being whoever went undefeated, which in this case was Joe Potter, so congrats to Joe. Dory there, probably, I think that's the best it's done so far, which is surprising to me. Not a lot of Warriors doing well, Desi especially with how I know Team Sigil did very well in the Carling in London with it. So an interesting decision to kind of take a step back from that, maybe a response to the KOs coming forward, because I think KO is not a great matchup for you as the Desi deck, and I think also a lot of the other decks like learning to play against it now that they're aware of its how the deck works. I think that surprise factor being gone takes away a lot more to the deck than you'd expect. We got week 2 here. I missed out that was week 2 as well. I think this is the second one of week 2. We got Incom Gaming. Again, more of the same. I guess interesting things here. Gravy Bones, an illusionist-esque hero, something that necessarily hasn't gotten a lot. Potentially something that will get more like interesting bits to from the new Silver Age deck, although I'm realizing that they usually just put whatever's current in the format in there, so I don't think we'll get anything for him. But I think he is a deck that is interesting, and it's a specific niche that has the potential to be an angle at some point in the format. Obviously very open right now, we kind of have access to everyone, which won't be the case soon. We'll have that kind of vote to restrict with 4 heroes going, and then Chain coming back for a little bit, which I'm sure everyone's so excited for. Nothing special here. A very Briar focused top 4 with Olden being the other one there. Lewis Folks, brother to Matt Folks, as you'd probably imagine, following his brother's footsteps and playing Briar, but losing out to Kit in the final. So congrats to Kit there. And then EH Gaming. This was the biggest one that we've had, and also the one that I was at this one. This was very fun. Always shout out to Ross and Cole. Always doing great work with their events, as seen by the popularity of them, even with the format like Silver Age, which people generally weren't as excited to go to. Interesting ones here. We got a Rhino. That's one that we haven't seen much of. 9 KOs here. This is the highest KOs we've had. So 9 Briar before. Very KO centered here. Arachne Solitary Confinement as well, and a Betsy. Very very based choice, but unfortunately not doing the best, as you could imagine, with 9 KOs in the room. We had a very KO heavy top 8, with unfortunately me being taken down by Fraser. Shouts Fraser, very good guy, great consistent player in the UK. And of course the KO off in the bottom. We had the KO off in the semis, and then in the top, Tom managing to take down the Riptide. I managed to top 8, which is a shout out to Liam 2 there with the Riptide, very cool. The Tom winning out in the end with that one. So here's the total wins for everything in the UK so far. As you can see, it's basically just Briar. Smattering of other things a lot of the time. People winning when Briar wasn't around. Maybe outside of Jacob's win, but that's just at that point it feels more like a player diff than a Leviathan diff, if I'm honest. I mean, if it wasn't Briar, it was usually one of either KO or Ira or Kano. That's like kind of like was close to, if not were winning. Obviously Terra and Levia were kind of outliers in that respect, but taking down the PQs nevertheless. So this is what I would say is currently like the current meta going into going into this progress and the release of Silver Age officially with Compendium of Wraith. You see like I'd say the top three pre-ban would be Briar, KO and Kano, and then everything under that kind of being able to do well, but I think is just like a bit short in comparison to the power level of those three heroes. Desi especially had a great showing, a breakout showing in London, but after that kind of fell off, as we saw. Still doing quite well globally, I think, coming third generally or fourth, but I do think that if we're talking about power level after like a full, assuming all pilots are the same, I do think Kano rather wins out, but there is a bias there from me, as you could imagine. And I've put like kind of the Guardians together. Flavo, something I haven't really spoken about a lot. Same with Oldham, but they do have their place in the format. They have the capacity to come back at any time. Flavo does quite well, but I think KO makes it quite hard for things like Flavo. But we might see stuff like Valda instead. So looking at the kind of what we should expect now, these big four heroes are kind of what I would expect to come out of the BnR as the top dogs. Ira or Fi, I put Fi there just because Fi also has the capacity to do quite well, but I think Ira has a better chance with a uptick of stuff like the Guardians, whereas Fi generally doesn't do quite well in them, particularly Valda. And I think Ira having the ability to kind of swap between aggressiveness and defensiveness kind of helps her be a bit more of like a stalwart part of the top 3-4 meta. Things that in a similar sense actually rather, Valda I think has a very specific niche of being quite good into KO, which if you expect KO to be number one, which I do think KO will be the most represented, because realistically I didn't really change a lot about him. They took out like I said, like a very small meaningless card in the grand scheme of things. It's hard not to think about KO as number one. I think Valda's a very good counter to him in particular, but has an issue into stuff like Kano or Enigma, those kind of decks, but hoping that KO gets rid of those decks, because KO has a good matchup into the Kanos, into the Enigmas, means that the Valda has a chance to come out on top in regards to that. But of course I put Vincent here as well. Vincent's an interesting one. As we've lost the kind of main Runeblade Briar, it's like looking towards what's the next best Runeblade, because Runeblade is just inherently a very powerful class, and Vincent I think has a particular niche of being quite strong in that, like they pump out a lot of numbers. Obviously those Runegate cards, they're not bad, as you saw with how well they were doing in Chain. If you have the capacity to do some strong things, which Vincent does, maybe not as consistently as Chain, obviously, you can still do very strong things. And then the Deep Recesses, the new card from Compendium, is still a very powerful card, even in this format where we don't have things like Dirge, where you can make a lot of resources, Rune Chance. It's still possible to get to 4 Runegate, but even not, it's a blue, so it's you don't need much more from there in terms of Runegates. But yeah, I think it has the capacity to be quite strong. But I think the most important thing is the kind of decks to watch coming out of this with the unbans. So like Rake the Embers with Dromai, I think is something that could be particularly powerful. It's something that I think if people are able to base their decks around the meta and pick a point with it, it does well. It has a specific niche, but I do think it has an issue of losing to KO. In a similar sense, I think Florian has a KO issue too. I think realistically all of these heroes have like a KO issue, Icelander being another one. So like while they got a lot from the unbans, I don't know if it's necessarily their time to shine right now. The reason I put the Guardians there as well is that Rootbound Carapace is playable in both of them. Obviously they're Earth, Essence of Earth heroes too. Terra I think in particular has the most chance to use it, since he's more likely to play a large amount of Earth cards in his deck in general, and you don't really care too much about decomposing to have Earth cards in your banish, so you can always do the minimum of 2 Earth cards. But then it also lets you play things like particularly like the headpiece that lets you block 2 with it, or the arm piece when you don't want to use the civic options, because the civic head and the arms are probably the worst options for guardians outside of things like Valda, who maybe wants to use the civic headpiece since it's quite good for her. You don't necessarily want to be using them, and Bladebecker was maybe the second option you had, but like the earth options aren't bad. So while getting to 4 banish generally isn't amazing, because you don't have things like felling in this format, obviously. Just having, like, now you have another 4 block, but this one's a defense reaction and it's earth, could be quite important for Terra, I think, going forward, which is something just to look out for. That's everything really. We'll be kind of going back to a normal scheduled meta report going into the CC portion of the Progress season. Just thought I'd put out something, because we weren't really sure if we should even bother to do anything like this, but I think it's important, highlight the community and everyone that pay their dues, won their events, even if the events were maybe smaller than they would have liked, but we still had some great events and great people always showing up. So as always, you're all appreciated. And in a similar sense, I'd like to thank all of the judges that gave us, provided all of the information for us. We got our Coles, we got our Broders. Thank you all very much. And then of course all the event organisers, all the stores that are so kind as to give us the spaces to play these events. And then of course Thistle Tavern, which is our sponsor for Team Toxic. Always doing us a service, and I imagine a lot of the UK with a service in terms of getting cards. But yeah, I think that's it for now. So thank you all very much for watching, and we'll hopefully see you next week with a breakdown of Toulouse, and then also a breakdown of the ProQuests going into this weekend. So take care.